So there has been several decades of a very dynamic interplay between supply and demand of childcare services. So, and in Norway, it took more than 3 decades before we could achieve what we can call full coverage of childcare. That means that there is enough places to all parents who want a place for their child. And I also want to mention to you that that there has been a special social pedagogical tradition to childcare services in the Nordic countries. And this is typified by a holistic approach to childcare development and learning. So in this tradition, we see childhood as a life stage with its own value, and care, play, and learning are seen in relation to each other. So it's not a very purely pedagogical system. And this is also reflected in how childcare institutions have been organized, because it has not been common to have separate organizations or institutions for children under 3 and more school-like for older children. So in Norway, all children go into the same institution. And if you look at the sort of the main legitimation of childcare, it has been in the best interest of the child. I mean, these pedagogical aims have been very central. But of course, gender equality and supporting working mothers has become very important and has been that for several decades. But in the beginning, if you go back to the 1970s, when this new sort of policies started, there was a lot of ambivalence towards working mothers, and also towards full-time care for young children. So, but if we look over these decades, this ambivalence has disappeared. So there may be some discussion in Norway today about what is the best childcare for the 1-year-olds, but I mean, there's no discussion about what is the best care for the older children. So, but there's, I talked about this holistic and this play-focused childcare, but we also see in the Nordic countries then that the same as we see in other countries, that there is an increasing emphasis on childcare as part of lifelong learning and investing sort of in future productive citizens. So it means that the more educational aspects of childcare is accentuated. And we can also see that in the ministerial responsibilities for childcare, because I think in all the Nordic countries, the responsibility has been shifted from some other ministry to the Ministry of Education. And then we can discuss whether this is a good or bad thing, but this is at least happening. Next slide, please. So, I mean, in the Nordic countries, this change towards making legislating childcare as a state responsibility happened in the 1970s, or even that was the case in Norway, but in Denmark it was even earlier in the 1960s. So in Norway there was this Childcare Daycare Institution Act that was passed in 1975. And it's stated that it was the municipalities that had the responsibility for developing and managing childcare facilities. But one important point was that there was no obligation for municipalities to establish services. So at this point in time, this new law was supported by almost all political parties, but there were very different opinions about what this entailed. I mean, what kind of care and how many hours per week and so on. But I mean, this was a very, very decisive first step. The next very important step was much later, because I mean this was really the 1970s was the start when municipalities started to expand childcare services. But I think that in terms of legislation, I think that the universal right to a place in childcare for parents was very, very important. And this was instituted in Sweden in 95, in Norway only in 2009. So, I mean, this has been only a little more than a decade that parents have had the right to a place for the child when the child gets 1 year old. In Denmark, parents have the right to a place in the childcare services when the child is 6 months old. But I mean, there are some details when it comes to this. I mean, what does it mean that it is a universal right? Because in Sweden, at first it was only for parents that were employed or under education. But later in the early 2000s, there was this right was also extended to the right to a part-time care for children of the unemployed and for parents being on parental leave with a sibling. But this is a limited right, so you can then you have the right to have 15 hours per week. In Norway, there is no such conditions on access to childcare. So this is a right to all children when they are getting 1 year old, independent of the parents' economic situation. So, but one detail that is important in Norway is that there is an annual uptake of children to childcare once a year, and that is in the autumn. And your child has had to be 1 year old before November that year to sort of exercise the right. And if you have a child that is not really fitting these dates, you have to wait until maybe next year. So here we can have, I mean, that this is a problem for some parents when you have a gap between the end of the parental leave. I will get back to the parental leave system, but there is a gap between the 1 year parental leave system and your access to childcare if you don't have your child at the most the best time of the year. Yes, and then I think also a very important component in the system of the Nordic countries is that we have instituted maximum parent fees. And we just had a little talk on beforehand where and I understand that in Switzerland it's extremely expensive. But here you can see the maximum fees. In Sweden, it is quite much cheaper than in Norway. It's actually 130 euro per month, which I think is very cheap. And you also have some reduction in fees if you, I mean, this is the maximum that is that the municipalities can claim for children. And there are some, and I think that if you have several children, this amount will be reduced per child. In Norway, it is about 300 euro per month. And actually the present government that was elected last year, it's a minority center Labour Party government, that the aim is to reduce the fees. So I mean, it's this is a very important part. And also there are some systems for fee reductions among low-income families. So I think that in Sweden, I think that no, in Norway, yeah, the municipality offer a place free of charge 220 hours per week for low-income families. And a low-income family is defined as having income less than 60,000 euro per year. That is the 2022 limit. So this has been a sort of a policy to try to integrate children from low-income families more into childcare. And there has been research, and also both in Sweden and Norway, that indicate that the maximum fee is very important in sort of leveling the socioeconomic differences. For instance, among children from immigrant families. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to mention this to you because all these policies are sort of interacting in how parents sort of are behaving in this childcare system. And of course, a main demand factor when it comes to parents' demand for childcare is mothers' employment. And the Nordic countries are known for having very high employment rates among mothers. I think it's about 8 of 10 mothers are employed. But there are differences between the countries when it comes to some other aspects of the family policy system. If you look at parental leave in Norway, it is 49 weeks at 100% wage compensation. So it's almost a year, and you get the same compensation as your previous wage. And we have this. That's another aspect, but we have this father quota of 15 weeks are reserved for fathers. So, but I mean, if you and then you have 5 weeks of holidays. So I mean, altogether it becomes a year. You can stay away for a year. But if you have your child in the wrong time of the year, you might have to wait for getting a place in childcare services. And also there are in Sweden, the total leave is about 16 months. So it means that in Sweden, children start childcare little later than Norwegian children. So most children in Sweden, they start when they are 1.5 years old. While in Denmark, there are more children below the age of 1 in childcare services than in any of the other countries, because they had this right to childcare earlier. And then we have a policy that you might not think we have in the Nordic countries, and that is a cash for childcare benefit. That is an allowance for parents that are not using public childcare, or you can have a part-time place. But this has been a very much contested policy in the Nordic countries. So it was instituted for 1- and 2-year-olds in Finland in the mid-1980s, and in Norway in the late 1990s. And in Finland, it has this has really become a very important policy for parents. So the uptake is quite high. While in Norway, the parents receiving this benefit has declined because we have had this very huge childcare expansion. And it was also, I mean, it was the allowance was abolished for the 2-year-olds. So this is also an indication of the political conflict surrounding this system. And in Sweden, they also had this kind of municipal cash for childcare until 2016, when it was abolished by a social democratic government. So as you can see from this, I mean, there is a very clear left-right sort of cleavage on this issue. And the main argument in favor of this benefit is that it supports parental choice, that parents should be able to choose between childcare services and taking care of their own children at home. while the left is arguing more like, I mean, they are concerned about the gender equality effect of this, and also that children are missing out of childcare, and this is maybe most conflictual for children with immigrant background. So, and when you see the statistics on this, you can see that those it's women that are taking this grant, and women with low education and immigrant background are the majority of those still taking this benefit. But I also think I should mention that there is a little difference between when children are starting school, because I think that is also something that is affecting is important for the childcare services. So in Denmark and Norway, children start school when they are 6. In Sweden, they start when they are 7. But the 6-year-olds in Sweden, they are in preschool, separate preschools, that have a special program for 6-year-olds. So there are a few differences. Okay, so next slide to enrollment. I mean, I have been living through several decades where there has been a really lack of childcare facilities. So I mean, there have been long waiting lists, even if the childcare has been expanding gradually for quite a long time. But today, more than 90% of all children are enrolled in childcare services. The exception is Finland. I will show you the figures in a minute. But if you compare Norway with Sweden and Denmark, we can see that Norway was much slower to expand childcare than the 2 other countries. And especially the care for the under 3s was a big problem. I mean, there was very few places. But then in the mid-2000s, there was this very important all-party compromise, where it was decided that there would be changes in the economic and legal measures. So, and this is when the maximum payment was introduced. And it was also decided that public and privately owned facilities should have the same conditions. And but I think that maybe the most important decision was that from this time, it was a legal obligation for municipalities to offer childcare services. And what is very interesting also is that, I mean, at this time there were long waiting lists, and I think that the assessment was that full coverage would imply 80% coverage rate. But what we saw was that the expansion in places actually also increased the demand for childcare. And I have done an analysis together with some colleagues where we also examined the attitudes of mothers. And what we could see is that this change also changed the attitudes of mothers. So all mothers across socioeconomic groups think that childcare is the best from children of the age 2 and above. There is a little different opinions about the 1-year-olds. So this is, I think it's very important to see how this interaction between the institutional system and parents' preferences. Okay, please, next slide. So these are the figures for the Nordic countries, and you can see Denmark, it's 90 plus for all age groups. Same for Norway and for Sweden. And I mean, Norway, I mean, it's almost all children are in childcare. if you look at the, but I mean, you have a kind of an education for children of these ages, but then you can see also that there are differences between Finland and the other countries. It's quite a big difference, actually. For the 2-year-olds, 58% of the children are in childcare. It's a little more than half in Finland, but while it's almost 90% in the other countries. Next slide, please. I just wanted to show you this this graph for the Norwegian development, because this covers the whole period that I'm talking about, this historical change from the 1970s. So if you look at to the left, you can see in 1977, I mean, there was very, very little childcare available. And then you can see that the development for the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds were quite gradual, while it was much slower for the 1 and 2-year-olds. And there is a very interesting dip in the curve for the 1 and 2-year-olds, and that was actually when the cash for care benefit was introduced. And I think that one of the explanations is that the municipalities believed that the demand for childcare would go down, so they were sort of slowing down on the childcare expansion, but that was not correct. So, and you can see the black curve for the 5-year-olds. Okay, so, and some researchers have mentioned this. If you look at from 2000 and the following decade, they have called it the toddler invasion in childcare, because you can see that there was this very, very strong increase among the 1 and 2-year-olds. So if you look at in 2000, 37% of the 1 to 2-year-olds had a place in childcare services. It had increased to 80% only 10 years after. So, I mean, these are very, very, very strong figures. It's not very often in social science that you find this kind of very, very, very big changes for over such a short time period. What also happened during this period, the 2000s, is that also there was an increase in the supply of full-time places, because that had also been a problem, that there were too few full-time places. So, of course, I mean, there are some socioeconomic variations still among parents, but it's more pronounced among in the age group of the 1 and 2-year-olds, because you can see that almost all 3 to 5-year-olds are in childcare. Okay, so please, next, funding and organization. From these figures, you will probably understand that Norway is spending a lot of money on childcare, and these are some OECD figures that show that Norway spends $18,500 per child. It's 2% of the gross domestic product, and figures for Sweden and Denmark are quite similar to this. And by comparison, I think the OECD average was 9,000. I mean, half of this, and also less than 1% of the gross domestic product. And if you look at how is this system funded, I mean, it's like other social services in the Nordic welfare states. They are tax funded. So kindergartens are funded by municipal taxes and also state grants. And the funding model, for instance, in Norway and Sweden are quite similar. So the municipal tax revenues are the main source of income. And then they get this state grant that is and the grant is sort of decided by the size of the population in the municipality, age structure, population density, and number of immigrants, and so on. But the parents also pay a fee, and in Norway, I think that is comes to about 15% of all the total cost. So it means that the public money is constituting 85% of the whole bill. And it's important also to just to mention that the amount of parents' fees and the maximum fee, this is decided centrally. So it's not up to the municipality to do this. And I was asked on beforehand whether there were any austerity measures, but I mean, the situation in both Sweden and Norway, at least, is an increase in money spent on childcare. I found one exemption, and that was in Finland, because in Finland they limited the right to childcare to to parents who are fully employed. So, but the main trend is that there's a lot of money going into childcare, and there is very little discussion about this. This is sort of the way it's the way we do childcare in the Nordic countries. Yes, and then please, next slide. I have to say something about public and private ownership to childcare, because here Norway is a bit special compared to the other Nordic countries. And I mean, there is a kindergarten act that regulates the authorization, operation, and supervision of childcare, and municipalities are the local authorities for kindergartens. But in Norway, about 50% of childcare institutions are privately owned institutions, but they have the same conditions as of publicly owned institutions. So, and this is actually a historical remain, or what you can call it, because if you go back to 1960s, it was only, I mean, 80% of all childcare institutions, the few institutions that were there were owned by private owners. And I think that one of the reasons why we have this high share of private institutions in Norway is that the municipalities didn't really follow up on the growing demand for childcare in the 1970s. It wasn't enough, but they had this very generous funding system. There was this grant, so it was simple for other actors to move in. And actually, there were quite a few parents. I had my child in a parent-run. I was actually on the board, the head of the board. That was kind of that was quite a lot of work. But it also meant that there were other private, like voluntary organizations, religious organizations, and so on. But I think that the problem has sort of there has become a problem, because the ownership structure has been changing, and there has been an increase in for-profit ownership, which has not really been regulated. So we now have some childcare change that is childcare facilities are owned by limited liability companies, and some are registered in tax havens, and they are extracting profit from this. And this has become a very, very hot debate in in Norway, because profit for commercial owners in welfare services is a very contentious issue in general. And for instance, when it comes to school, there are a few private schools, but it's not allowed to extract profit from schools. So it can be argued that the only way for private childcare sector is to get to sort of achieve a profit is to lower the costs, and very often the cost is sort of that it's often made by lowering employee-child ratio and personnel costs. So the central left government in 2013, they decided that they wanted to try to sort of limit this profit. So and so they had this regulation about that this private institution could have a limited profit, a reasonable annual result. But I think that is it's a very loose definition and so on. And of course, the parliamentary right opposition, they voted against this because they thought this was showing a mistrust towards private ownership. But I mean, this continues to be a very, very disputed issue. And the present government, that is a Centre Party and the Labour Party that was elected last fall, they will come with new regulations that will try to sort of limit the profit in this sector. There has also been an interesting development in Sweden, because there has been an increase in private, even if it's much lower share, there has been an increase in the share of private childcare institutions. So in the early 1990s, where this consumer choice ideology was sort of spreading, the municipalities were given the right to delegate the task of providing childcare services to private organizations in exchange for public funding. So, I mean, they are also subjected to the same regulation, and in Sweden, they have a national curriculum actually for childcare services. So, and they have the same financing, and they have the same user fees and so on. So, and so the share of private institutions have been increasing, and now it is about 25%. Research in Sweden show that highly educated parents are more inclined to choose non-public providers, but they can't find any differences in quality between institutions, and also the educational level of staff is fine. And what I see is that this partial privatization has led to services becoming more diverse in terms of pedagogical orientation. Next slide, please. Yeah, you wanted me to say something about childcare workers, and I think I would like to emphasize that Nordic countries place a very high demand on the level of education of childcare staff, because I mean the quality of and the pedagogical aim of childcare institutions are very important. When it comes to salaries and working conditions, they are regulated through collective agreements like all other groups in the Nordic countries. And in general, the requirement for kindergarten teachers is a bachelor's degree, 3-year university education, and also there are vocational programs for assistants. Researchers find that the quality in the Swedish system has been rising due to this rising level of university educated preschool teachers, and also by the introduction of this national pedagogical curriculum. In Norway, I think there are different regulations when it comes to, I mean, how many personnel in the childcare institution should have a teacher, have this preschool teacher education. So this is, I think it's the norm is that the pedagogue child ratio is a minimum 1 pedagogical leader per 14 to 18 children when children are 3 years or older, and I think it's the 7 to 9 children per pedagogical leader if the child is below the age of 3. I think in Norway, I mean, this discussion about quality, and also in this the private childcare institutions sort of lowering costs by having a higher employee child ratio so it has led to a new regulation where the staff child ratio, I think it was in 2020 when it was regulated. So now the kindergarten shall have at least 1 employee per 3 children when the children are under 3, and 1 employee per 6 children when children are older than 3 years old. And I also asked about the gender division of the people employed in childcare facilities. And in Norway, there has actually been quite a few efforts to encourage more males into the preschool education programs. And today, about 10% of men are employed, both as pedagogical leaders and in other functions. And this is actually higher than in Sweden, where it is 5%. And I think that this small difference is actually due to this very intensive policy trying to attract males. Okay, so next slide, please. What about gender equality? Just to try to sum up a little bit, I think that it's very important to see how important the kindergarten, as we call it, has become as a social institution in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. It's really an integral part of normal childhood and parenthood, both in terms of public finances and employment. So I think that it has also generated a new understanding of how important it is to society, and there has been this increase in increased attention to quality. And we have full childcare coverage because all parents who want a place, they get a place. And this has been achieved by sector expansion, the institutionalization of children's right to a place, and the introduction of maximum fees. And I also think it's important to mention that high coverage rates and also high parent satisfaction indicate that most parents, they want childcare for their children. And the municipalities have succeeded in meeting the needs of parents. And of course, there are questions that can be discussed, like I think educating enough skilled pedagogical staff continues to be a main challenge. And also, how do you get these small groups that now are outside kindergartens, how do you get to recruit them into kindergartens? Because I think that there are still families that do not use childcare because of economic constraints. And I think that especially when it comes to children with immigrant backgrounds, I think there is research that show that these are children from these kind of backgrounds are the children that will be most benefited from participating in childcare. And then, what about gender equality? I think that family policies are very important for gender equality in the Nordic countries. But I think And you probably know that the Nordic countries, they score quite high on various gender equality indices. But I think it's very difficult to say that this is what really is creating gender equality, and why haven't we achieved gender equality in all areas when we have this rather generous system. So I think that these are really complex questions, but and I think what you can say about childcare, I think it's very important for mothers' ability to work, at least work full-time. Because, I mean, even if employment rates have been high, there has also been quite a high percentage of women working part-time. This share is declining, and it is declining probably the most among mothers with the youngest children. And in that case, I think that the provision of childcare actually is very important for making it possible for mothers to work full-time. But unfortunately, if you look at some other gender equality indices, like, for instance, I was asked about what is the gender gap, and the gender gap is now is not very rosy. It's about 85% of women earn 85% of men's wages, and I think that is quite common. And this is related to the gender segregated labor market, and the gender segregated labor market in the Nordic countries have been quite segregated, but this is changing, and it's very slowly. So I think that maybe some things are changing very quickly, like, for instance, this parents' preference for childcare, but some other things are sort of locked into very, very, very complex structures. But I thought that just to end on a positive note, I thought I would just show you some figures that might cheer you up. Okay, so please, the last slide. Yeah, okay, the next. So, because you also wanted to know how is the gender division of paid and unpaid labor, especially unpaid labor. So this is a table that shows the development of mothers and fathers' time use. This is minutes per day, and how it has been changing since the 90s, over 3 decades. So if you look at the father's share of, so this is just to show the sort of the gender division. A father's share of all paid work went down from 73 to 60%. So it means that mothers are, if you look at one group of fathers and one group of mothers, mothers now perform 40% of all paid work. And if you look at the father's share of housework, it has been increasing from 18% to 34%. And here I need to mention that mother's time to housework has been declining, so that is part of the change. And the father's share of time spent on children has also been increasing. Okay, so now I have been talking for quite a while, so I think I can stop and hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne Lise, for this very interesting conversation. And before we go to the questions from all participants, we're starting with 2 questions that Anja and I myself have prepared, and I think Anja can start with her first question.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I would like to follow up the end of your presentation. What effects does the organization and funding of childcare services have on gender equality? I know you said that the connection between family policy and gender equality is not so clear or easy, but I'm interested to get to the bottom of this question a little bit. I hope you are okay with this. In Switzerland, women provide the largest part of unpaid childcare, like in Norway, and also the largest part of paid childcare. Paid childcare is an activity with very low wages in Switzerland. And today we have a much higher participation of women, especially mothers, in the labor market. Also in Switzerland, 8 of 10 mothers are part of the labor market. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the unpaid childcare of mothers has been outsourced to low-paid women in childcare services and to grandmothers. There has been hardly any shift to men. You showed this shift in Norway at the end of your presentation. And first, how do you view this change? And then to the paid child care, what is the gender proportion? I think you said it before, but maybe you can repeat between the gender in the paid child care, and how are the wages in paid childcare services in Norway? And finally, still perhaps an estimation on your part, can you make this link between the organization and funding of childcare services and more equal share of work and thereby also of income between women and men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that these are very interesting questions that I have been thinking a lot about in my career. When it comes to the distribution of paid and unpaid work, so I think that what is happening in Norway is really the sign of an important shift, because I think that fathers are becoming much more involved in the family. So there is a redistribution. You can say that what has sort of been the main idea about the Nordic childcare or family policy model is the earner care model. And that means that care work should be redistributed from the family to the public, and within the family from the mother to the father. And I think this is what these figures are showing, that we are moving down this gender egalitarian track when it comes to the division of paid and unpaid work. And also, that is not figures I showed here, but what we also can see that if you look at the income of mothers, because I mean, that is also a reflection of the redistribution of time, is the relative share of, I mean, one thing is the wage gap, but if you look at the income of the relative income in families, you can see that women are earning a much or an increasing share of the family's income, and that is very important, I think, for issues like, I mean, the decision making and power in families and so on. So I think that this is we are in a very positive development, and I think that I just very briefly mentioned that we have had this policy of earmarking parental leave for fathers. I think that that has been very important as a kind of a, even if it's not that many weeks, and even if mothers still take most of the leave, I think has sort of set the whole mentality about what fathers can do and mothers can do, and they have sort of broken down the barriers when it comes to men and caring. So I think that the way fathers are caring about their children today it's a very, very different mentality, I think. When it comes to the paid childcare, I mean, it's low paid work. I mean, at least the assistants working in childcare facilities, but while the kindergarten teachers are kind of low, middle, in the middle. that is quite similar to other groups that have a kind of bachelor degree. But I think that that is very important, that you are sort of educating the childcare institution staff. I mean, that you are sort of demanding pedagogical qualifications. I think that that is also an important thing to sort of to increase wages. So I don't think this is not really a very, very bad sort of low paid sector of the labor market, but it's not highly paid. But I also think it's important that the childcare sector is very well regulated, and we have, as I mentioned, also you have this collective agreement. So I mean, there is a system sort of taking care of the rights and the working conditions of the employees. And so I mean, this outsourcing of mothers' care work, we have very little, for instance, private childminders and so on. And I don't think grandmothers are doing a lot of childcare work in Norway either, because they are in the labor market. I don't know. Did I answer your questions? Good.
Okay, so I will follow up with my question. I would like to come back to the point about austerity measures, or the question of austerity measures, and also the contradiction between profit for private companies and the public task of childcare. And I think it was very interesting. You mentioned this cash for childcare benefit. And what was the political idea behind it, and was it a part of austerity measures also and discussions? And is that the driver that we saw in the statistic in Finland, that we have such a huge difference between Finland and the other Nordic countries? Mm-hmm. And the second question is, could you say a little bit more about how the profit logic in Norway was curtailed for private providers, so that they couldn't make the same amounts of profits that they had done before?
Okay, so no, what was the sort of why did the Nordic countries introduce this cash for care benefits? I think when it comes to Finland, I think it was a cheap way of sort of satisfying or stopping the increasing demand for childcare in the 80s. And I think that, and this sort of became very successful in the way that it has also, and the municipalities also, they included the right to also care for older children at home, because you could also see from the figures that older children also had a lower enrollment rate in Finland. So and I think that since this happened very early, before the sort of the childcare, use of childcare became very common, I think it was very important for creating this home care ideology that has been very, very strong in Finland, and that is still actually quite strong. When it comes to Norway and Sweden, it was, I would say, it had nothing to, or it had very little, it had nothing to do with austerity or sort of trying to save money or something like that. It was rather a kind of a reflection of the ideological winds of choice that was sort of sweeping through these countries in the 1990s. And it was, and I also think it is a part of a more family-oriented ideology concerning family and gender equality. And you're not that concerned about gender equality, but more concerned about the family as an institution, and a more conservative way of thinking about that the home is a good place for children to be cared for. And I think that over time this has shifted, because today there are very few arguments about, and it was this idea that you should choose between taking care of your own child and having a place in childcare services, so you could work at home. And today almost no mothers are staying at home anymore. So now the argument has been shifted more towards that maybe it's better for some children to start childcare when they are 1.5 years old and not 1. So I mean, it sort of has this whole argument has also sort of become has shrunk, because the idea of choice, I mean, parents want childcare. I mean, that's everybody can see that. So, but it wasn't really had nothing to do with austerity, actually. And I mean, in Sweden, it has been abolished. And this has been a kind of a fight between, because it was instituted in 1994, first time, then it was abolished by the social democratic government that came into power. And then a right-wing government instituted it again in 2008. And then it was abolished in 2016 by a social democratic government. So this has also been a kind of an ideological struggle between the left and the right. So this has been the kind of a, and I think it was successful in the 1990s, because then the idea about very time-squeezed parents met this choice rhetoric. So it was a kind of a very good fit. But I don't, this is not the debate anymore. Then you had this question about profit logic. Well, I think that the short answer is that it hasn't been possible to sort of curtail their profit, because one thing is because there has been some very complex things about municipalities selling very cheap facilities to private owners, and then they sell this to, they have sort of, some have grown and have developed chains, and then they have been sold, and then you have some kind of internal, you have very complex organizations that you are sort of subsidizing part. So it's I think it's very, very difficult to try to stop this. But I know that the current government, they have announced that they will come with some regulations, and I think that this employee-child ratio has been very important, because then it's less difficult, or it's more difficult to sort of save money on the costs on the employees.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. Die Runde wäre jetzt offen für Fragen von den Teilnehmern. Man könnte sich direkt melden und die Frage auf Englisch stellen oder die Frage in den Chat stellen auf Deutsch. Sandra Beriger hat sich gemeldet.
Oh, sorry, I had some troubles. I'm a developmental psychologist working in a school. I'm here for the woman of the middle in Switzerland. I have two questions. One is, how many hours are your little ones after 1 year in childcare? Perhaps it's better if you could answer, and then I could go on.
Yeah. Actually, I had that in my talk, but I thought it would be too much. So a full-time, most parents have a full-time place in childcare. That means that you have an agreement that your child can be in I'm talking about Norway now. And it means that your child can be in childcare 41 hours per week. But the surveys have asked parents how many hours the children are in childcare. And the average, I think, is about 35 hours per week or something like that. And I think it's also important that I think that the idea among parents is that children should not spend too many hours in childcare. And for instance, in Norway, we have had this discussion about having night childcare facilities for parents working at night, but that has been dead-end discussion, while in Sweden they have this kind of institutions.
Yeah. Then I wanted to know, in Switzerland, all the people who care for children, they are very, very low paid. And they are the ones who have not a good formation, school formation. If you don't get through your school and you cannot get a higher education like a kindergarten teacher or a teacher or whatever, then you end up in childcare. So there is really not a high level, and it's really paid. It's not good paid, and I'm wondering, so you find enough people working there with such low wages, or do you have immigrants who don't speak your language, or how does it go if you have so much daycare? So
well, I think that there is a difference between Norway and Switzerland, because I don't think that it is relatively low paid, but it's not very low paid, if you understand the sort of the distinction. No, but I think that, as I also said, there is an emphasis on sort of having educated. I mean, there should be kindergarten teachers in all institutions. But I think that there is a challenge to get enough kindergarten teachers and to get well-educated people. And I think this is really a crucial question, because I think it's very important that it is quality care. And I think that is also what parents want. I mean, that's why they want childcare, because they think that this is, I mean, that is better than having some uneducated private arrangement. They want the pedagogical extra that you get from childcare. I'm not sure about the immigrant share among the employees, but I think that there are a few, especially, for instance, in Norway, where we have quite a high immigrant population. And maybe this is a problem that is not really acknowledged, because I think that if you argue that it's important that, for instance, children of immigrant background should be in childcare to sort of get language training and so on, it doesn't help if you have employees that don't talk the language good enough. So I think these are very, very important questions. So I think it's very important to be aware of this when you want to sort of develop what kind of system do we want and what do we want it for.
Fine. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Now Regula Pullman has the next question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've got also two questions. The first is, you said about the qualifications of the kindergarten teachers, but the assistants, do they also have some sort of, what sort of formation or education do they have? And the other question is, you said that most children do have full-time childcare, well, even if it's 35 hours. But what's the percentage of women who do work full-time? Do the women also work full-time? And well, in Norway, full-time, what does that mean? Is it also 41 hours or is it less?
Mm-hmm. The question about the education of the assistants, I think that some of them are unqualified, but some of them are also have some vocational training. It's in the after secondary school, you can choose a vocational program where you become a kindergarten teacher assistant. So, but I think I'm not. I don't know the exact share of. But I think that there is probably a rather high share of not vocationally qualified. I would think, varying probably between places, regions in Norway. Yeah, full time. What was your question? Full time.
And how many women, or what percentage?
Yeah.
Of men, and what does it mean hours wise?
I think that when you look at mothers of preschool age children, I think, or maybe school children also, I think that the share now that is working full time is 70%. So it has been much higher. So it has been really increasing. So about 70%. Among men, I think it's 90, 85, 90. And then it was, what is full-time work? Very interesting question, because the average working week in Norway is 37.5 hours. But I think that, and if you are a shift worker, you have shorter hours. And I think what is quite common among parents is that if you have flexible hours, you are sort of leaving, you are shifting on getting your child to and from childcare, so that the child is getting not too many hours in childcare.
Thank you very much. I'm less worried about the children in childcare than about the people, not just women and men who work too much. At least in Switzerland, full time is too long.
No, but I think that this question about how long is the work week, I think that is extremely important also. And very often we don't really take that into account when we talk about family policies. But I think it's a very important it's a very important part of the structural conditions that parents are trying to shape their parenthood within.
Dann hat sich Doro gemeldet.
Good evening. Okay, I'm on now. I have a question about the quality measures. You mentioned the employee-child ratio as one quality measures in childcare. I was wondering, are there other quality measures also that are done, and maybe they show benefits on childcare on children, for example, in child development or even later in educational success? Are there any measures about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very, it's a field of research that is growing. I mean, not only in Norway, but in many other countries also, to see what are the benefits from childcare. And I think there are a few Nordic studies that show that probably, I mean, what is common is that you look at the grades of children when they are in school at certain ages and so on. And I think that some studies find that it increases the grades, but maybe it doesn't have that large effects on educational outcomes. But I think that I think this is important, of course, but I think it's also important to think about what is the alternative to childcare, because the alternative to childcare in Norway, if you go back 20 years, it was uneducated nannies, because women are working and they want to work. So I think that's also very important to have that as part of the picture. The alternative is not that the mother is staying at home and taking care of the children. That is history.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any more questions left, be it in the chat or live? Olivia Blöchlinger?
I think just the last sentence you said, it's history, but not in Switzerland. But anyway, I wanted to ask you about the opening hours of your facilities, because I just made some calculations with the costs or the funding you mentioned, and the system here is much more expensive than what you said. And so, yeah, I was wondering, because here in Switzerland, the opening hours are like very long. They are from 7 to 6 in the evening. And I think it's part of a problem, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure about, I think that the opening hours are varying somewhat, but I think that almost all kindergartens have closed at 5. And I think they open maybe it is between 7 and 5. Yeah. So, but I mean, the costs of the system, I mean, there is a lot of public money going into this. So,
so yeah, I was just wondering, because the child employee ratios, they are better than here. And so, yeah, but
it is shorter opening hours.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. So that's just because, yeah, you heard already that like costs are mostly covered by parents here in Switzerland. So that's part of the problem. Yeah. And
I think that
so I was just wondering the costs, what's factor in this.
I guess the big difference is how much the state put, or the public money that is put into the system.
You know, you mentioned this 18,000. So it's roughly 20,000 for a place. So that's, yeah.
No, that was not for a place. That is, well, I mean,
that's the funding from the state.
Yeah, that was the funding from the state.
Yeah.
You don't think that sounds a lot?
It is.
Yes, of course it is. But if I just like one place here in Switzerland for a day costs 100 euro and or even more, and then it's not enough to cover this. That's was just my yeah. We would be happy it would be the same here.
Yeah, I understand that because it is really a generous system.
Okay, then maybe we'll move to the next and possibly the last question from Marsha Madurin.
I just want to mention that in Switzerland, 2% of GDP is a hell of a lot. It's 14 billion of Swiss francs, and it's so much more. Even if 15% are paid by the families themselves, it's a hell of a lot. And this is, I'm sure that without this funding, it's just impossible to create these systems of kindergartens. And I think it's just the point, the most important point. But what I'm wondering about is, you said that Norwegian has the highest, still quite low quota of men doing this work. And how did you manage? How did you try to have more men in this job?
Yeah, just about this money, I think that it is a lot of money, and I think I just want to repeat what I said when I started, is that you have to understand this as a historical system. This has been growing over many, many, many years, and you wouldn't have been able to introduce this system from scratch. So it's just, you just have to start working towards this. Yeah. How this trying to recruit men, I mean, there has been a lot of campaigns directed at men that has been, I mean, the ministry has been engaged, and a lot of communication work and so on. But I don't have the details, but I mean, it has been quite extensive, and it's also part of a public debate. I mean, it's necessary to get more men into childcare and into, so it has been sort of a kind of a part of the public discourse.
Mm-hmm. May I add a question to this? I was teaching for bachelors. I'm an economist, and I was teaching for bachelors of nursing. And there are few men also having this education. And I asked always, why do you do this? Why have you chosen this job, this formation, and later on this profession? And the men always said, it's, I'm sure I will have a job. I won't have problems of unemployment in future. Mm-hmm. And the second they said, I have a lot of a very good perspective for a specialization, for advancing in the job. And this interests me as well. If you start to work in this child education, what are your perspectives from a professional point of view? Because I just noted when I asked that this was, the women said other things when they were arguing why they have chosen this education formation. It was bachelors, not other. And I just asked myself, which was your argument about this? I noticed this as well for social workers. I was teaching also economics in the high school or university for applied science for social workers. And I asked the same question, and there it was also the employment security as an argument, but also I think it was the change from just professional formation to bachelor, to the university formation, which was very attractive for men. So what was your argument?
Well, this is just on the top of my head. I think that the prospects are not very good. I mean, it's a kind of there are not many other jobs than if you become you can go into, you can teach in school, lower levels of the primary school. But I think that it's not that caring is not, you cannot care because you're a man. I think that this is kind of, that's not really the topic anymore. But I think that probably it is rather relatively low paid. And I think that is important when it comes to sort of changing the gender balance. That yes. Yeah. So I think maybe that is the most important thing, and not that men feel that they can't deal with children and so on.
I agree with you. I think it's the salary, the income. When the incomes in churches for social workers was really much higher, you had much more men being social workers in churches. This is the only thing I know about this link about the salaries, and the other thing I think is somehow the perspective question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 2 questions left, and I think then we will wrap it up because we have now 1.5 hours already talked about the subject. I will now read a question to you from the chat that I received. And the question is, how do you assess the differences to Switzerland when children are already in childcare at 4 months and not only with 1 year or more? How do you assess this for the political discussion, the conviction of the society economy?
Did I get it right when did you say that children are in childcare from 4 months old? I think that most Norwegians would think that that is very, very early. And you know, this is a big discussion because, but I think that what is interesting about this is what is sort of considered normal varies very much between countries, and it's very much influenced by the opportunities that parents have. And I think that in Norway and the other Nordic countries, you shouldn't have, or childcare before the child is 1 year old is sort of out of the question. And I think in Sweden, it's 1.5 year old, it's out of the question because they have a longer, so it's a kind of these ideas about what is good or bad for children. I'm not sure if 4 months old, if it's very dangerous for children and so on. So, but I think that having a 1 year parental leave, I think it's there are many advantages to that because and if it's full paid and so on, you have time to slow down and take care of your child, and especially when the fathers have to take part of it. But I think that is a very important part of the Nordic model also, that that you should also sort of facilitate this gender equality issue.
Okay, and Sandra Berger.
Ich hätte gerne, I would like to ask if it goes on to school. You have a day school going on, and what does it mean? You have this good daycare until they are 6 years old, and then how does it go on?
Yeah, we have, I mean, in the lower levels at the primary school, lower grades, there is there are not many school hours. So then we have after school care for children, for children up to the age of 10. And then parents have, and that is so somewhat interesting in Norway, is that the after school hours are not regulated in the same way as childcare kindergartens. So it means that there are different ways of organizing this, and it's also more expensive relatively if you look at the number of hours children are there. So, but this is also sort of, I think that there are initiatives also to regulate that part a little more. I think that that is what they have done in Sweden. So, but I mean, there is care also after kindergarten.
Okay, thank you very much. And the very last questions also from the chat we had, what are the total costs for applies in childcare? So besides the contributions of the state in Norway, for example.
I guess that must be the figure I showed you about the $18,500 per child. That is the cost per child. And but I mean, how much is 2% of the Norwegian gross domestic product? I'm not sure how many billions that is, but I guess you know that Norway has quite a big, we have oil, you know, so we have a very big gross domestic product, so I think it's quite high. I'm sorry, I can't answer more detailed about that.
Thank you very much. I think we can end now the discussion, and I think we can end it with a very big thank you to you. It was a very interesting presentation and a very interesting talk. And we were very happy to have you here from Norway all the way. And I think the subject is going to be very actual, and maybe we'll come back to you with further questions also concerning the situation that is developing in Switzerland. And yeah, thank you very much for being with us and giving us all this insight.
I just want to thank you for all the interesting questions. We could have gone on with this whole night. So thank you so much, and good luck with your project of childcare in Switzerland. Okay, so bye-bye.
Bye, and thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.